Hello, everybody. Good evening. If anybody's there, I didn't even check. Oh, there you go. I was going to say hello, everybody in the chat, and this is Facebook, who's also in the panel. I think this is one of the first streams which has more people on the panel.
It's a little bit obscure, but it's worth a bit
obscure, but you know what? I think we'll enjoy ourselves. So joining us tonight, we have, starting from the other corner, the Irish Geek. Noel, how are you?
I'm good. I'm all right. Already. I'm ready for action. Sorry.
You're ready? You sound a little bit up. That's very good.
I'm good. We're here, self-isolating, and we're all good. Cheryl's watching a bit of Friends now, even though she has it on DVD. She's watching it on the TV. Weird.
You know what? If Friends are on, you have to stop and watch it. It used to be Seinfeld. Now it's Friends.
Yeah. Kind of got over Friends about 10 years ago.
Yeah, well, it's Friends. Okay, I didn't like Friends when I realized they were old and creepy. You know, when they were young looking, it was fine.
Yeah.
But there's one point where they're like, these are real losers. I don't want to be around any of them. Okay, to your right is the Mega Geek, masquerading as Rebecca Gold. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm just bored today. You know, because stuck at home doing nothing, you know.
Well, there you go. Welcome to the apocalypse. The apocalypse is dull. That's as we are finding out.
Who knew?
The apocalypse is monotonous. Monotonous. It's actually like raising children. You know, you think you like it, but really, mostly it's boring.
Yeah.
Moving on, we have Dan Hadley on Facebook. How are you, Dan
Yes,
Hadley?
I'm here, and as I've just said, I'm going to spare you guys my singing voice this evening. But I've spent most of the last fortnight back in 1986, purely by coincidence. I've been talking about it on the Type 40 podcast the last couple of episodes worth. And yeah, here we are again back in 86, which was pretty much my happy place to talk about the Sing Detective Rabbi. I can't wait.
It's a good time in my life, I have to say.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
Right, what else have you been talking about?
Doctor Who season 23.
Which is season 23? That's pre-trial, right?
Yeah, Colin Baker, Trial of a Time Lord. It's episode 50.
Yeah. Oh, I think that was the lowest point of Doctor Who.
Episode 50. Colin Baker looked a bit big in that.
He did indeed.
No, but Colin Baker was the best saving grace of that season. He he rose above everything.
Yeah. Well, you can hear all that I thought about it.
Her voice, he was a good presence in.
You can hear my opinion about it and my two guests on episode 50 of Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast that's just dropped a couple of days ago.
That sounds good. I think it's available on all good social medias, wherever you can find them.
Every single one, every podcast streaming platform you can name: Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Podbean, you name it, we're there.
Cool.
I didn't even understand most of those things. That's how old I am.
That's because he's from...
He's
from Birmingham. What can I say?
Jason, how are you? Good evening.
Aye, brothers.
I knew
whatever.
He's been working on that.
Yeah. Go to hell.
Very impressive.
Go to hell, all of you who don't like my impression of a pirate Irishman.
McLeod, have you been watching Highlander?
Yeah, there you go.
There's no Irish pirates.
There are now, matey.
Oh my God!
I do it just for you. No.
Oh no, you do.
Okay, so can I ask the panel who had seen the Sing Detective before being asked to do this panel?
Me.
No.
Me.
No. So no, you're a Sing Detective virgin.
Yeah,
me?
I am. I'll probably tell you today.
Let's start with you guys. What were your impressions?
I was like, what the fuck was I watching? But I will say one thing, even though I was like, what the fuck am I watching? It was actually quite interesting. What the fuck was I watching?
Yeah, you wanted to keep watching it, even though you had no idea what the hell it was.
Like, there was one scene in particular, right, where your man, what's his name? Gambon, is it? What is that his name? Yeah, he's in his bed there, and he has a breakdown, yeah? And he's basically telling the doctors and the nurses what's wrong with him. And then they all break out and sing and dance, and I'm like, oh, okay, what the shit is happening here? Like, it just turned into a musical. I was like, Okay. But one thing I was confused about, is this all in his head?
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. Some of it's in reality, but like the idea is, from what I can understand, like actually I just listened to an interview with him like 20 minutes ago before we started this. Essentially, is you have you don't really have things all happen at once in your head. You have memories, and everything kind of like bounces off each other, and fantasies become memories become fantasies, and that's how you go on this like journey of self-discovery. And the whole thing is a detective story about who he is, but it's like the catalyst for that is this terrible disease he has, which triggers hallucinations, which are very.
Strange about the show. I'll tell you what was strange about the show. It's how dated it was, and also all the racist slurs that were in it as well, which was kind of shocking when you think about it. You look at it now.
Well, the world has certainly changed a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I actually didn't look at it that way, though. Because when I was watching it, I was very aware of the time period that this was made in. So when I heard those racial... And by the way, well, I just want to say, but when the racial slurs were used, they were actually used in they weren't used in a...
Hateful.
It wasn't for a hateful reason. It was like your man, they were bedmates basically. They were by each other, and it was just a friendly way of them bantering with each other. Now, yeah, I would agree with Ian. If today's SJWs got a hold of it, they'd rip it apart.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
Yeah.
But fuck that shit. That's the way it was back then. I've no problem with that. I had no problem with that. I actually found that quite funny, to be honest with you.
The demographic of the UK has changed a hell of a lot. Not just attitudes, but the demographic of the UK has changed a lot in the last 34 years.
But you know what? It really nailed that mid-80s. I was like, when you started having like the Indian shops everywhere, like they came from nowhere. Like suddenly in 79 you had like 3, and then by 86 most cooler shops were like Indian ones.
They were, yeah.
Like, I mean, whether we found, I mean, it's a shame to go straight into this talking about that, but I suppose it could be the elephant in somebody's rooms. But I mean, the fact of reality is that those conversations between those two men, without any real malice in the conversation, no hatred, no actual prejudice, conversations like that used to go on all the time in every working environments, schools, pubs and street corners. And
TV shows. You remember Love Thy Neighbour?
Oh yeah, and other TV shows as well.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
What I'm saying is reflective of society and how we communicated at the time. You know, minorities who were a very tiny minority compared to now. Then, obviously, we were all acclimatizing to one another. I mean, obviously, it's a generation older than me. So I can only speak for what I remember observing my elders and how they would communicate. But most people worked alongside somebody of another ethnic group, but it was normally only 1 or 2 people of other ethnic groups at the very most.
A new thing. It was new.
Yeah.
It was like, iPhones. Oh, that's new.
It was like a 15-year handshake while people got to know one another.
Right.
Even now, I still cringe when I see the bit where he lifts his shirt up and you see all that stuff in his skin. I'm like, oh, that's so horrible. That must be so painful. Even today, with the makeup they used, it just makes you feel horrible, doesn't it? When you see
talking about cringing before we leave the point, I just want to say that what you were saying, Ian, when I heard the word, the word "packy," that made me cringe.
Yeah, so did him too. Me too.
And it really did make me cringe. And obviously, you used to hear it every day of your life in the 80s. Growing up when I was a small boy, my last long-term relationship that I was in was with an Indian woman, and she talked about it all the time about growing up in Britain at that time. She's around 40, and so that brought some of it back too. But to actually hear it and see it in drama like that, I wouldn't say I was shocked, but it does, because it is reality. But it does make you cringe, and I'm more than happy that time and that word has been left in the past. It's only right that those things are in our rear view now.
I'll tell you what's strange about it is that the BBC allowed it at the time. Just got to show the BBC was far more into realism than it is today.
Yeah.
If they made it today, they would never have those words in there because of blah blah blah. You know what I mean?
I'd say realism and realism and creative integrity, Ian, which you know that was of paramount importance. And to work with somebody like Dennis Potter, who by that point he'd been around since the early 70s.
Yeah.
One-off dramas for armchair theatre and things like that.
Yep.
And he was a novelist moving to TV in the mid-70s. This was a man that the BBC and Channel 4 were both falling over themselves to work with, the way that people are with Russell T Davies now. So he could say, look, you know, I demand creative freedom. It wouldn't have been that much of a struggle like it is now to get that creative freedom, to be fair, because most of the people would have been from the same kind of backgrounds. You know, David Attenborough, he was high up at the BBC. He was controller of BBC
was at
Two.
the time. He was.
I think he might have brought Dennis Potter through, in fact, and brought him to television. So I wouldn't say it was an old boys network, but that people were more minded towards the integrity of the word and the story, and presenting a version of reality.
I'll tell you what's interesting as well is when I first saw it, and I was a lot younger, I found it a chore to get through, especially the first episode. But now, as I'm older, you look at it as a film. Well, as a filmmaker, I look at it and I think this is very unique. It's the way the whole thing is put together. It's very unique. You'd never get something like that shot today. Like, for instance, they did an American version, which was the Singing Detective, the movie with Robert Downey Jr. And it wasn't even as rough or as hard as the TV show.
Dennis Potter wrote that screenplay for the movie before he died. I think there was very little actually done to it. And if I remember rightly, I don't think he picked out Robert Downey, but because it was in the works for quite a long time. But I mean, you talk about filmmaking, you talk about TV of the time, you talk about the fact that film series. I have stopped talking since you blipped off, Rabbi. It isn't just me, I promise.
I haven't missed anything.
Wind me up and let me go. I mean, this is a film series in every sense of the word. Episode 1 probably lasted about an hour and 10 minutes. Some feature films don't last that long. All shot on film, look beautiful. So it is. Each episode is a movie, Ian.
No, I totally agree. And all the usual suspects were in that. All the same faces, the guy that was from Desmond's, who played the guy that wheeled him in the first place.
Right. It was every face you see in
every face you saw.
They went from there to Minder, right?
Back the guy from Minder. Yeah.
Patrick Malahide from Minder.
Exactly. Unrecognizable. You didn't realize the body language he had at Chisholm, right?
And also, who's the girl in it again? Joanna
Wally.
Joanne Wally before Joanne Wally Kilmer.
She became a star. She became a star overnight, didn't she?
Because of it. Yeah, because of it. Yeah, she became a star because of it.
Last saw her in Daredevil, I think. Wait. While I was gone, did Jason say anything yet? Did we hear?
No, Jason hasn't said anything.
Jason, you with us?
I'm here.
Yes. Okay. So you're a newbie. What were your thoughts?
Well, let me preface it by saying, look, I'm not really into detective shows. So when you when you said you would love to get my opinion about this, right off the title "Singing Detective" was an immediate. I want to say a turnoff, but I thought, you know what? I thought Rabbi's recommending it. Rabbi has valid opinions about a lot of things, so I'm going to give this a shot, and I'm going to see what this is about. So when I first started watching it, I was like Nola. I'm like, what the fuck am I watching? What the hell is this shit? You know, I'm like, what the? So I'm about 45 minutes into it, and I'm thinking, I don't understand what the hell's going on. So I took the liberty. I thought, wait a minute, this is interesting, but I didn't really get what was going on. So I took the liberty of kind of reading some liner notes about getting the gist of what the show was about to really help make sense of it. And after reading a couple of synopses, it clicked into place. This is a guy who, he's kind of my impression was he's a cantankerous fellow who is really down on his luck, has really been down on his luck, is at the end of his rope because of his condition, and is just working out this novel in his head that he's kind of given up on because it really didn't do much, but he's still kind of working through the plot line and kind of working out the kinks, and he slips into his little fantasy world because he's suffering from a lot of pain, and doesn't take the medication. So here's a guy who really, he's got some problems. And I mean, see, look, at first I wasn't too into the whole switching between the layers. You know, you got a noir layer, and then you got his childhood layer, and then you've got just his present layer.
It's a bit Highlander, isn't it? A bit Highlander.
Yeah. So, but I wasn't necessarily too keen on that. I wanted to kind of have it keep track with one story, but as the story progresses, I saw what they were doing, and I really came to appreciate just a lot of the interactions. I mean, some of those interactions are awesome. The interaction when he's laying in bed and the head doctor approaches with all the staff. Yeah, and they're just treating him like he's, you know, they ask him, the head doctor asks a question, he goes to answer, and everybody answers for him every single time. He's, you know, and then at the end, he basically says, you know, what would I know? I forget what he said. It was something like, I'm just some blathering idiot. I don't, what, you know.
Well, the theme isn't it, that they keep going back to, is that they've infanticided him, and that's why that he's reduced. Yeah. And I don't know if you feel this same way, Rabbi and Ian. I watched it when I was 12, 13, the first time, when it was very first on, and I remember watching this and thinking, you know, what you were just saying, Jason, about that he's sort of at the end of his rope and working this novel through. You know, that became sort of slowly apparent to me. Obviously, I was only, like, say, 12 or 13. But I remember thinking how old this man was. And he must be about 60 years old. Yeah. But he's not, is he? He's probably only about 45, something like 45 to 50, at the very most.
You know what, right? Also, as a filmmaker, I think it's genius. Because I don't know if you noticed that when the doctors were talking to him, that it was a completely different style to the style when Marlo was in the bed talking to the Asian guy. That style, when they were talking to each other, and he had and he said, "Get me a cigarette." That was all very kind of realistic and in the moment. But when the doctor started talking, so it's a different style. When the doctor started talking and everybody started doing, finishing his sentence and stuff like that. It's a very different style. It's kind of like they took another movie and stuck it in this one. So I don't know if you noticed that between everything from the flashbacks to when people are talking, it's a very different kind of tone.
Can you nail that down, Ian? Is that like 19? Would you say that's from like the late 40s into the 50s as well?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I noticed it. I don't know if you guys noticed it. As I said,
not so much.
It's very, very comical when the doctors are talking.
When it went into like his point of view shots.
Yeah, look at it.
You mean like the rapport between the characters? It was almost like something at the Muppet Show, very rehearsed. Right. He speaks, she speaks, blah blah.
I mean, so you got different styles on different scenes. Like the flashback is very film noir. Then you got when the doctors are talking, it's very kind of comical the way they were talking. It was like some kind of comic sketch. And then when Gambon's talking to the Asian guy and they're friends, it's very much rough kind of council estate. There's council estate movies they used to make in the 70s. It's very kind of that. So I think it's very clever.
Kitchen sink drama. It's standard.
That's the word. Kitchen sink drama. So 3 different styles within the space of one episode. So it's a pretty. It's way beyond its time. Way beyond its time.
I find this whole thing just blends and holds together.
It does, yeah.
Really, 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 really well. Really well.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ian, you were like in the mid thought.
Sorry, what were you going to say, Dan? Sorry?
Well, there's just so many points that you come to appreciate about the interactions between. Look, Michael Gambon. If they had picked a different guy, this would have been a completely different show. He made this show. So I did look. The other characters, the casting for this is excellent. It takes to take nothing away from anyone else who's in the show. Michael Gambon was he was the icing on the cake. I think his demeanor was perfect. All the way around. It was right on. He was right on. I really appreciate just, his really dry sense of, it's not even humor, just his quips and just sarcasm. for me, that was it was just the icing on the cake. Again, I'm not into detective movies, novels, but this had something that transcended detective stories. It really did, and stuff like little things, such as the interaction between him when he's wanting a cigarette. Those two nurses are making up the bed, and he's asking for a cigarette, and the one nurse says, you don't need to be. He's like, oh, yes, quite right, nurse. Quite so. It might make me ill. And I'm like, yeah.
Sorry, can I just intercede there just really quickly? There's some breaking news on Sky News, and it just involves the British Prime Minister. He's he's in intensive care now. His coronavirus symptoms have worsened. It's on Sky News, so it's official news. Boris Johnson says Downing Street says Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been moved to intensive care after his symptoms worsened. I don't want to mention the thing, but it's breaking news now. So I just thought I'd let you know because there's a few on the panel from UK. No problem.
I hope you get
well soon. Is all I say.
Well, hopefully they'll administer some hydrochloroquine and the azithromycin. That might be a good time to do that.
Well, let's hope he pulls through.
Same here. No.
Jesus Christ! I told you if it gets war, what did I say last night? If a politician gets it, all all hell is gonna break loose. If he hopefully he doesn't touch wood.
Yeah. Oh dear.
Yeah, man, that's bleeding ridiculous. Oh, by the way, just on talking about world leaders, Leo, our leader, he used to be a doctor, or back in the day, or a medical student. He actually has signed up now to be once a week to help people with coronavirus. So that's our leader, like our leader, our prime minister, as they say, is he's going to be helping out now in the hospitals once a week, which I think is pretty, putting himself at risk like that. That's pretty bloody ballsy, if you ask me.
Let's pray that everybody who's been tested positive for it and is living with that and working through makes it through.
Sorry, I didn't mean to bring the mood down, but that is breaking news.
It is important. It is important that we all know. Yeah, cheers,
exactly.
Jason, just for what you were saying, I'm not a detective program person either, or I haven't got a camp sensibility either. So I don't go with musicals and things like that. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, I mean, obviously, like I said, I was a kid when I saw this. I didn't really know I didn't know what I liked and what I didn't at that point. But in a sense, I know what you mean. I know how it's almost like the complete opposite of the kind of drama that I would usually go to.
Yeah, and I think it really transcends. Sorry, go ahead, Rabbi.
I missed everything. Like the last thing I heard is we have breaking news. And then
it was that Boris Johnson's in the hospital. He's in intensive care at this point. Yeah, so that's on BBC and Sky News, so it's official. That's what we were discussing, and then we went back to the singing detective, and
already you've got the jokes of people saying, "Damn, this sucks. Boris Johnson's going to get someone's ventilator." That's the usual sick joke.
Well,
that's not nice.
Like, for fuck's sake, leave it out. Like I'm Irish, and I'm even you have to, in these times, you put everything aside. It doesn't matter what you personally think about Boris Johnson. You know what I mean? The fucking guy is in intensive care now, so it's obviously bad. So I wish people would stop.
Yeah, that is not good.
Just ignore that bullshit.
Yeah, I know. It just makes me mad, man. Yeah, go on. Sorry, back to what we were talking about.
Yes.
No, Dan was saying that for him, he could relate with my sentiment that I'm not really into the detective genre, so to speak. And I was just saying that I mean this really, for me, there is that element, but I think they did it in a way for me that was they just didn't overuse it, or they didn't draw on elements that turn me off, that are the reason why I don't care for the detective genre. They didn't really linger on that too much. And I think it was done in a way that was interesting because they didn't start well. It didn't dwell on that. So there's so many other elements of this at work, but again, in this, there's just so much to draw on that's not detective oriented. You know, the interaction that you, Dan and Mega Geek were talking about between him and Ali, that's great. I mean, these characters, what I appreciate about it is these characters are so natural. You feel like you're watching actual people interacting rather than people that are wearing a personality. You know,
exactly. It's because this kind of drama, Jason, this was from an age where, and this is what British drama used to excel at. This was before we used to try where all our drama, all our popular drama sort of reflects an ideal of what we'd like society to be like. And people behave how we would like them to behave. Whereas Potter's work, and to be fair, I'm sure that the Rabbi and Ian will certainly both remember this, most drama in the UK was reflective of how people actually spoke and behaved.
Right, exactly. Not like that now.
And there wasn't a herd mentality about things. People believed different things back then. People disagreed, but that would be played out in conversation rather than
Minder. Minder was the biggest show at the time.
Minder's a perfect example.
Had characters with totally different worldviews that were very good friends.
Yeah, but also remember that in the old days, BBC used to experiment quite a lot, and Dennis Potter's his work is very experimental. Let's face it. We got a musical, we got a detective story, we got kitchen sink drama, all wrapped in one, which is amazing.
Well, I have to say, after one episode, I've really enjoyed this show, and I can't wait to see what happens in the next one.
It goes to interesting places. The real detective story is all in his childhood, which you don't really see in the first episode.
We've only seen 2/3 so far. We've seen 2/3 of it, haven't we, Rabbi? There's the other third starts to unfold next time.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because when I started watching this episode, I thought, it wasn't like it just sucked me in, body and soul, but it was enough that I wanted to see what happened, and I ended up in the next 2 or 3 days finishing off the entire series.
In those days, they were slow burning.
Wow.
TV shows were slow burning. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this was, but this was good. This was really good. When you juxtapose this against the stuff that's being released today, there's just such a dearth of the qualities that the time and the detail, the attention to detail in terms of let's cast people that are genuinely suited for the characters, not just we need to check this box off and tick this box off. These people were genuinely suited for these characters, and guys like Ali and Mr. Hall, that guy, I love that. Mr. Hall is so he sucks up to these nurses when they're in front of to their face, and then he turns around and he's just a bundle of anger.
Right, you know exactly who he is as well. It's amazing how little dialogue you need to understand exactly who these characters are.
I mean, that's not true. It's very dialogue driven. It's
very dialogue driven, but basically have one scene with Reginald and Saul.
Yeah, exactly. When he started speaking, though, you knew exactly who he was. The guy that sucked up to the nurses, and the young chap wasn't listening to him anyway, because you got the impression that he was listening to him like that every day, so he's not listening anyway. So, but the way it started was really slow burning. I remember when I was watching it. I think I was like 14 when I watched it, or maybe even 15, and it was very slow moving show. But then all shows like that on the BBC, especially TV movies, they were all very slow. I mean, what's interesting about looking back, I mean, I've been looking back quite a lot recently because I've got nothing else better to do, of course. But Rabbi, I would have went back and watched that show even before you said you were going to do something on it. And I was watching recently Sapphire and Steel. I was watching Sapphire and Steel a couple of days ago, and that is a mind-bending thing as well, and that's very word heavy, just like the singing detective.
Okay, just as a complete aside, the trouble with Sapphire and Steel is you had about 17 minutes of show in a 22-minute episode. So you have these recaps. You're like, you watch him and you binge watch him. You see the same thing repeated over and over and over and over again. Like, before you get something, you say, "Oh God, it's new." And then that new bit is freaking awesome.
The point I'm trying to make is, in those days, they used to take risks, right? I mean, Singing Detectives is a huge risk for the BBC. Let's face it. Even then, it was like the jewel of their crown. But it's still a risk though, because we're mixing genres here, and it's not really done. So, and it's the same thing with, I guess, Sapphire and Steel.
Well, if you remember, guys, when
it was just like very, very cheap to make show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sorry.
If you remember, guys, when this premiered, it not only was it really, really high profile, it's got the Radio Times cover. You'd got the soundtrack album on vinyl and cassette. Right. It was a big, big deal. Not only that, but within this first episode, when this was broadcast, people went absolutely fucking spare about, and they always did about Dennis Potter's programs, because of the, and bear in mind, there's not really, he spells out the word F-U-C-K in episode 1, doesn't he? There's not lots and lots of swearing in it. It was the sexual content, and it was the obscene lewd acts. That's what people complained about.
That's what got
I think I have to disagree with you there. I mean, even though they advertised it quite a lot, right? It wasn't a talking point in school. It wasn't a talking point in offices. It wasn't. What made it big was the actual idea that it was from the BBC, and the BBC did their best to try and advertise it everywhere. And within the movie and TV community, it was big because it could sell to different countries and stuff like that. But I'll tell you one thing: when I was at school, we weren't talking about their Singing Detective. We were talking about other things. And in my world, it wasn't big at all. I watched it, of course, when it was first released, but it wasn't big in my world. And I don't know whether I'm right or you're right. Do you know what I mean? That's the way it seemed to me.
You know, my parents told me about it being on, and my parents were like big normies, but they knew what a weirdo I was, or like a TV bar and a TV.
We all know that now.
They still am. I'm a TV snob. So it was it Lee, Anthony Davis asked in the chat what we think of Penance from Heaven, because and then they told me about Penance from Heaven. Of course, in those days you couldn't just go and watch it. It took me about 5 years to find it after that.
Yeah,
and I always preferred this as well. I
don't know about you, Dan. I don't know about you, Dan, but my parents in those days, they were very lenient of the shows that I watch. I'm watching this Singing Detective, and this girl is rubbing this guy down. And this guy, he's trying not to have an erection.
Where he's going through his head, boring. That was wonderful. Like, oh God, think of something boring.
That was the scene that caused all the outrage. There was a scene in every single episode, and I have only just rewatched episode 1. I haven't watched the rest. I think it's wonderful that you have, Jason. That says how good this is. But I'm just talking about episode 1. That scene where she greases. That scene, I'm going to grease around your penis. Every single time that the Singing Detective is brought up on some other show, an arts show, an arts review, that's the scene they always play, because on Open Air, if you remember, Open Air was the BBC discussion show that notoriously that Chris Chibnall went on. That show was on every single weekday, and the Monday morning, the very next day, virtually the entire program was about the Singing Detective, people complaining about how graphic it was.
The scene that got the most.
You watched it, right? Your parents let you watch it.
Yeah, no problem at all.
As I'm saying today, no parent will let their kid watch something like that. None.
I think that the scene that probably, from what I understand, the scene that caused the most controversy was in a later episode. Certainly not that was. Controversial. But there is a scene that definitely stirred quite a bit of controversy from what I understand.
There were complaints every single week, and it just got. Bear in mind, this was filmed months before they broadcast it, so this was going out anyway. And there was something every
White House.
It just blew up.
I remember it was around that time there was a comedy duo called Hale and Pace.
Hale and Pace.
They did a whole episode just ripping the crap out of this. It was so fun. They had him like totally in the guy's makeup.
It was just
pretty funny.
Pretty funny. Yeah.
And Dennis Potter,
this was a cultural thing.
Dennis Potter, I think that's interesting to know that Dennis Potter had the same skin condition. It was actually worse than Philip Marlowe's, the lead character.
Considerably worse, yeah.
Yeah,
he used to appear. He used to appear on TV shows himself, Dennis Potter, as a kind of like Melvin Bragg. If anybody knows who Melvin Bragg is, I suppose James Lipton is a kind of American equivalent, maybe. So he was all about not popular culture, but the arts. And Dennis Potter would go on late at night. He'd usually got a fag on the go on live TV, and be talking one-on-one with an interviewer. And a lot of the time, he would be, as he was talking, holding his cigarette, exactly as Philip does in that.
Exactly, yeah.
He'd be holding a fag like that. He was crippled by this, and from what I understand, through large portions of his life, he was in constant pain.
Yeah.
And so obviously, a huge amount of this is autobiographical, but it's the middle segment. A gentleman in the chat mentioned Pennies from Heaven earlier on. I can't remember who it was. Was it Lee Davis? Mentioned Pennies from Heaven. This was the middle section of a trilogy. I can't remember what it was actually called, the whole trilogy, but Pennies from Heaven, Singing Detective, and the third was called Lipstick on Your Collar. And the idea was that when you put them together, that it was a trilogy of stories that would all marry up thematically in a way that Dennis Potter would want them to do, that told his kind of, not his life story, but his early life. I think that because Ewan McGregor's in Lipstick on Your Collar, isn't it? And his character is Dennis Potter when he was in his 20s, I think. And this is more his childhood. But yeah, Dennis Potter's a fascinating character, and this is a peak. This has to be the most autobiographical of them all because it's him at his most vulnerable, I suppose.
Yeah, I actually think Cold Lazarus is probably, which by the way I forgot to upload. I will send it to you. I think Cold Lazarus is probably his most autobiographical. But really, because you really do see all the themes that you've seen in all this stuff before, but a little bit more real and disturbing. So it's like, that's more real.
And also, there was, in those days, there's nudity when they fished that woman out of the thing. And I don't know whether Mary Whitehouse was still operating then. I think she was. She'd be the one that was.
But this was protected from Mary Whitehouse because this was the arts, and the arts would get away with freaking anything, and they knew it. Yeah, this was artsy fartsy. Although it's a shame. Like I was talking on Twitter last night with Az, saying, "Oh, you should come on," and he's like, it's not really in my wheelhouse." It's really a shame that he doesn't think this is something he would like. I think he would love this.
It depends. I mean, let's face it, right? The Singing Detective is an acquired taste. Even today, it's an acquired taste. So Az is not really into that kind of stuff. Really, he's very much a straight shooter, Az. So
but I don't blame him. I do think he understands what a good story is, and this is more than anything else. This is what this is. This is a really, really fantastic story. It's like this is done so well. You're marrying up all these basically three major stories, intertwining them into one, adding in all the fantasy elements of the musical stuff, and again, it tells one complete story about who he is and how he became to be who he is.
No, I don't know. I mean, I liked The Singing Detective when I first saw it, and I have more of appreciation for it now as a grown up. Right. But I still don't think it's. I wouldn't put it in the class of great. Personally,
I can't think of anything better than this.
No, well, I've only watched one episode.
In terms of drama, I can't think of anything I think is better.
Sorry, Noel, go ahead, mate.
I was just going to say, I've only watched one episode, but I wouldn't say this is great. It's very good, but it's not.
Watch the rest of it.
I have to wait until I watch the rest of it.
Yeah, watch the rest of it because I'm telling you, you can't get a fix on this until you actually go through it because it does.
This is the first chapter.
Yeah, this is the first chapter.
You haven't even met one of the main characters yet.
There's so much. Let me tell you, there's so much in this that the story matures, things do evolve. It does, this is a moving story. It doesn't, it's not stagnant as much as a lot of it may take place for what it's worth. This is a moving story and it does evolve. And there's so much good dialogue, so much great dialogue, brilliant dialogue to be had in this, in later episodes that I highly recommend. Just stick it out. If you're not hooked by the third episode and you don't want to continue by the third one, well, hang it up then. But
I remember bits. I've seen all of it when I was younger, but as I said to the Rabbi,
Well,
I
how
can't
many
remember a lot of
episodes
it.
is that?
6.
Oh, the 6 episodes.
And they're long.
They're an hour and 10 minutes, something like that.
I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I didn't enjoy the first one. I did, but I wouldn't actually call it great TV. It was
Get through it.
But no, what would you say is like a great piece of British?
Well, not British. Not British. I would say Mr. Robot. Mr. Robot. After so many years later, Mr. Robot's probably one of the best TV shows. I think.
I'd have to disagree on that one as well.
Yeah, I wasn't. I couldn't latch onto that.
British show for me, only Fools and Horses.
Ask
me what was one of the best British TV shows. You had only Fools or drama.
I think what's important to say is that
in my house we didn't watch much drama. We watched Steptoe and Son. We watched Only Fools and Horses.
Excellent.
We watched what was the other one I mentioned? We watched Inspector Morse. Inspector Morse, actually, the original Inspector Morse was actually
it was good. Yeah, I agree now.
What it's important to sort of quantify and to accept and to label this was only ever going. It wasn't ever going to be something that was going to run and run and run and run.
Right, yeah.
And this is something that we still get shows like this now where they tag them as limited series, don't they? But back in the 60s, 70s, back in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s, there was loads of shows like this where they were never intended to run more than 6 episodes, 10 episodes, sometimes 3 episodes, because that was the only story that they wanted to tell.
Oh, and I forgot to mention as well, Detective Serious Taggart was actually quite good as well.
I remember that show.
Do you remember
I loved it. I loved it.
Brilliant it was. I remember the one. It's the one story that always pops in my head. It's the one where there's a couple living in a flat and they're having a fight, and the husband basically murders his wife, and then he proceeds then to dump her body in the bins down in the flat, and he thinks he's going to get away with it, and then obviously Taggart comes in and does his business.
You know what?
I think it's easier to compare anything, comparing the Sting Detective to something.
Dan, listen. Do you know the shows in America, especially Jason? They have all these shows with people that help. They have detective shows and they have someone helping them, but they're not police. What do you call them again?
Consultants,
right?
Yeah. Right.
Consultants. You have like The Mentalist and I don't know, Elementary, right? But you know who started it? But do you know who started it? Do you know what the very first one it was? Cracker. With Robbie Coltrane. Robbie Coltrane.
Cracker was better as well. Cracker was great.
That was the very first show.
Porridge as well. I forgot to mention Porridge.
Dan, you're going to make a comparison.
Yeah, well, I suppose that there are very few of these kinds of dramas that people still remember now, that people still buy when they re-released on a new format. I'd say Edge of Darkness is one. Claudius is another. And the Naked Civil Servant with John Hurt, that's probably another one.
That's a great drama.
You know, these were moments in time and cultural touchstones that a lot of which have aged. I think the Sing Detective has aged particularly well compared to most.
Consider. Look, this is one of those shows that the whole is much greater than the parts. I would say this first episode for me was entertaining. Was it great? I would say, look, I'm looking at this from the overhead view of all of it together. So all of it together, it was definitely great. This episode taken in isolation, I can see how you would say, no, it was good. I was entertained, but it wasn't great. Okay, that's fine. But if you watch this as a whole, now good, I think the parts that were really good in this, the dialogue, I liked it a lot. I mean, I was really entertained, but you really come to appreciate it because the characters are completely fleshed out as you see this story evolve and things do change. There's some movement. You really come to appreciate this in a whole new level when you start to see the full picture come together, because at this stage, this is like taking a couple of pieces of a 500 piece puzzle. This is like taking 30 of those pieces and you can't it's hard to really appreciate
And
the overall
Jason,
picture.
Oh, sorry, but Jason, would you say, how it's been told, how you felt about it when you first started watching it? I wish they'd just tell it in the right order, in a linear way. Now you've watched it all, you see why they didn't do that. How traveling the parallel lines brings it together. All those lines do sort of come together and
they
sort
converge.
of cross over.
There's a convergence of that, and I think it was necessary. I mean, initially I was like, look, they could have left the noir. I could have handled just the present layer, but I see how these coalesce, and it was necessary for them to coalesce in order to tell the story, in order to see how. Well, I can't say because if he's going to watch the rest of it or try to watch the rest of it, I don't want to give anything away.
The only thing I can think to compare this to in terms of and it doesn't even exist in this media is Watchmen. Watchmen has a similar kind of layered thing, and if you read the first episode of Watchmen, you're also getting a snippet of what Watchmen is.
Yeah, the comic series Watchmen. You should specify, not the crappy TV
We're
thing.
not talking about the HBO show, which was.
I've got to admit though, I can see where Jason's coming from. I've got to admit, when I was 14, 15, watching shows like Singing Detective, Pennies from Heaven, everything that the BBC coughed out, I hated it because I loved American TV shows so much. And all I wanted to do was to try and imitate and learn how the Americans did it. And it's got to be the opposite with Jason. Jason gets bombarded by the American shows, so they kind of get this, like they're used to it. Then when they get an American show, a British show on, and it's completely different to what they've seen, they can appreciate it more. But I did like the Singing Detective, but I didn't think it was great. I kind of remember all the episodes, and I know where the story's going But I didn't think it was great.
I'll tell you why I think it was great. It was great because there was some movement in the show, but I think it was great from the perspective of this dialogue. Michael Gambon, the way he delivers this dialogue and the interplay between him and some of these characters, and specifically, I don't want to mention the character, like I said, in case he's going to watch it. I don't want to give too much away, but there is a power struggle, and Michael Gambon and his character come out victorious practically every. Well, I won't say every time, but he really does a great job of carrying his intellectual weight as this character. He does a fantastic job.
Those scenes are some of the best scenes that have ever been on TV.
Yes.
If you like Cracker, you'll like those scenes.
So from that perspective, from a writing perspective, the dialogue is what. And yes, there are some situational elements that I really appreciate. I mean, the first episode had some of that between, like, for example, Ollie and Philip Marlowe. Those were good. I think the little things like Reginald and Mr. Hall. Those things are really. You could have taken Reginald and Mr. Hall. That could have been a sitcom. You could have had those in a sitcom. That's great stuff. But I think that the dialogue and how natural these people were, how natural a fit they were. And, I've seen some good stuff. I'm not a fan of Pennies from Heaven, in case, just so you know. I don't like the show. I like Steve Martin to an extent. I'm say again.
The BBC did a version before the.
Oh, well, never mind then. Never mind. I didn't like the English version of Pennies from Heaven. So.
Well, I mean, I didn't think the dialogue was. I thought the dialogue was okay. It was passable in Singing Detective. I mean, that's just my opinion.
Can you think of a show that was like this, on par with this, that you felt? Because I've seen a lot of shows, but the interplay, the intellectual element in the dialogue, this is poetry in motion. There is some real poetic moments.
I disagree.
Well, what do you name one? Name a show that you think was dialogue wise, writing wise, in the context of dialogue, had the intellectual wittiness and poetic quality that this did, but it took it to another level.
Okay,
I can't think of one.
I can.
Okay.
House MD.
Oh, Jesus.
No,
you've got to be kidding me.
It's a difference of opinion.
Everyone's
Wait a second. Hold on. Wait a second. Wait a sec.
How?
Opinion.
No way. No.
You've got to make. I've got to defend myself.
Actually, compare the two.
I've got to defend myself here. I've got to defend myself.
Care.
No, let him speak. Let him speak. That's fine.
Just because you're a filmmaker, you're wrong.
I've never seen.
This is completely nonsense and ludicrous, man.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
I've never seen House.
We have to agree to disagree.
I'd like to know. I've never seen House, so I'd like to know what you mean.
Yeah, I'm curious. Go ahead.
Well, I can't. You have to watch the show to understand it. I mean,
you've got to give some examples because I've seen House, and I was. I thought. Hugh Laurie is a great. He's a very good actor, and I like his portrayal in the show. I've seen the dialogue, and I think
snappy.
He's very snappy and he's very witty. You're going to compare House to Michael Gambon's performance in this, in the dialogue
of course.
No. Look, we'll have to agree to disagree. I think it's good,
exactly. But I don't mind.
Well, no, that's fine. I just think for me, comparing House to this, House is a watered down. It's a watered down version of how I see this show. This is a condensed. Well, if you were to open a can of frozen orange juice, this is concentrated intelligence. House has some of that, but there's a lot more watering down of that. I like House. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's got its moments, but no, this is very classic. I don't think House. This is the difference. I think House is good. Is it timeless? I don't think so.
I think so.
Okay.
People talk about Aaron Sorkin's work, the West Wing in particular.
West Wing is timeless as well.
And I mean, because I never saw the West Wing either.
The West Wing is brilliant. It is.
So,
but
that's like there's a crispness to that dialogue. It's not kitchen sink drama, is it? But it's workplace, and it's very much interpersonal. And on all sorts of different levels, from what I understand,
it's a little bit too snappy for my. It's a little bit too.
But that's the thing. That's the thing. When it comes to the Singing Detective, you have to appreciate the tone and the scope of what it's trying to do, and you have to appreciate what House was trying to do, the tone and the scope of what it was trying to do. I didn't think much of the Singing Detective dialogue. I think it was pretty standard, but I think things like Mr. Robot, which is incredibly well directed, and House. The dialogue is so sparky and it's funny, and some of the scenes are moving. First season, second season, third season, it went off the rails on the fourth season. But I really think House is really good. But that's just my opinion, right?
Okay.
I don't mind.
Lots of people I know like it. I meant to watch it, but I just never got around to it.
I think the difference is, for me, House doesn't require much brain power to figure out what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. This actually requires a little bit of thought. Where there's the interplay between him and another character in another episode, where there's this sort of power struggle, and Gambon is being quite flippant. There's you're not going to just digest that as if you're reading a Sunday comic. There's a lot of thought that went into that dialogue that you would not find in 5 episodes of House, in my opinion. The level of intellectual prowess that was required to write that dialogue, you won't. I don't find it, because it doesn't require as much brain power for me to sort through what he's saying in House. I can figure that. I mean, that doesn't require any thought.
Though, Jason, they're different.
But you're making a comparison. I asked you to make something similar in terms of dialogue. We're comparing dialogue.
This is what I think is a difference.
I think the dialogue in House is just as good as
doesn't require as much thought to break it down.
Mega Geek,
than what you call it, than Singing Detective, and that's just my opinion.
It's fine. But this is what I think is a fundamental difference between the two shows. I think that that House is essentially designed to be a weekly entertainment. It's something that was grinded out. They sold it by the width.
This was only a once-off series. This was only going to be a once-off.
It was, because you had years in it. Whereas the Singing Detective, and that's what was its goal. Its goal was to fill that 45 minutes of TV and make you come back for more. And it did it well, and it did it intelligently. They cast it well. I'm not knocking it at all. I think it was superior for what it wanted to do. What this is doing, though, it's describing the a three-dimensional reality of a person's soul, or a snapshot of somebody's essence and their being, and you're not looking at it directly. You're looking at it from the reflections. You're looking at it from his reflections of his fantasies, of his perceptions of his current reality, from his memories, and so you see the reflections of what the essence of this person is, what the soul of this person is, and it's passionate. But it's not just showing you that. It's showing you that it through a movement. It's got this thing that's got an arc to it. As you say,
but so is loads of American shows have it as well. Do you know what I mean? I mean, loads of American shows. I'm a huge fan of American shows, the good ones. There are a lot of shows that has that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but the delivery by Michael Gambon is completely. We're on a different level than a guy like you, Laurie. You, Laurie, is a good actor, but I'm not going to compare him to Michael Gambon. There's just no
way.
I think if you want to compare an American show to an English show to Sing Detective, I think
I've got one for you, Ian.
What's considering
another British show? Name another British show. Yeah, not House. Name another old British show that you think is at the level of writing or level of dialogue as the Singing Detective.
Correct.
A classic show.
Cracker.
No, I need the new ones. Yeah.
Cracker was well written, well performed. Very, very new, and the Americans copied it. Obviously, did their own version. But what I'm saying is that I have a problem. I have a problem. If you just let me explain, right? There's like, for instance, right? People always, when they see things like Singing Detective and the Big Blue, when everybody keeps going on about the Big Blue. Unfortunately, I'm the fella that thinks they're kind of pretentious. I'd rather watch E.T. or Lawrence of Arabia, or do you know what I mean? That's the kind of fella I am.
Yeah, I'm a populist too,
yeah. Even though I like Singing Detective, it's just my opinion. It's not as entertaining as an episode of House. It's not as fun as I say, or engrossing as Cracker, or even Inspector Morse.
Well,
so that's just my opinion.
You may find.
I've only watched one episode, and I've watched Inspector Morse and Cracker like you, and I have to disagree with you on that one.
You may think that. Here's the thing, Noel. Look, Ian. You may think that Hugh Laurie is just a better. You may appreciate his performance better than Michael Gambon, and if that's the case, then that's fine. I understand. I can respect that.
I understand too. Yeah.
Okay. I personally think, I mean, and I can't prove it, and I'm not going to try to. You have your opinion, I have mine. I think Michael Gambon I like him better as an actor in this role than I ever liked Hugh Laurie in House. But that is just my perspective. Now, if most people agree with me, I don't care. If they don't agree with me, that's fine too. But I think that's where we differ. I think it's just maybe you're drawn to. The portrayal by Hugh Laurie, and I'm just not as much into that portrayal. So,
I think, like House isn't even my favorite Hugh Laurie show. I think it's my third favorite. Okay, my fourth favorite. Okay, we're talking about Hugh Laurie shows. My favorite would be Jeeves and Wooster.
It's good. It's funny.
Yeah, it would be Fry and Laurie. Then Avenue 5. And then
Avenue 5
before House. That's where I'm holding with House.
I think if I was to look at British shows and dialogue in particular, and the way that these sort of characters relate to one another and how that plays out, there are certain examples from British TV stretching back. I think the Boys from the Black Stuff, if you remember that from around 1980, 81, the Alan Ayckbourn thing, and who was it who created Cracker? Jimmy McGovern. Jimmy McGovern. I mean, Cracker was a continuing detective drama. It was, but before he did Cracker, there were several other shows like that. I think some of Russell T Davies' work. I think The Second Coming and what's it called with Bob and Rose. I haven't seen Queer as Folk, but I'd certainly say the two of those are up there. You know, there's a reason why Russell T Davies won the Dennis Potter Award. His dialogue's quite simple. I'd also liken. I'd say that what Dennis Potter does is also an extension, reflection of the kind of stuff, Rabbi, that Alan Bennett used to do as well, only in a different setting.
I think he does it better than Alan Bennett.
I think he does as well, for my taste.
We just have different tastes and
That's
different of opinion. That's all it is. I mean,
you should get you Laurie to play our doctor.
It's just a difference of opinion. I mean, I'm naturally gravitate towards the American TV shows, and I think some of the American TV shows are absolutely brilliant.
Well,
I mean,
it's good that we have people who don't all see eye to eye on the panel. So I will say this though. I will say this.
Me and Jason disagreed vehemently last night. I think it was made for great YouTube.
Yeah, it makes for great contrast because if everyone is homogeneously agreeing about something, but I will say this. I will say,
stream, isn't it? It's going to be a Borden stream.
Yeah.
Look, I have to say, I was very skeptical when everybody was telling me to watch this. And I did find myself drawn to every character. Even the start of it for me was the way it panned down that alleyway following your man. Even that camera work to me and your man playing the harmonica in the street, and then you later on find them in the cupboard.
Right.
This place.
Yeah, it's a great moment.
I mean,
well, here's the thing. Here's the thing. I think
I haven't seen that like that in a long time.
I've seen it so
I'm glad it was recommended. To be honest with you, I can't wait to see what happens in the second.
Well, I think I think in terms of saying. And of course, Ian's more than welcome to disagree. I'm not trying to say this is the best British show ever, because we start talking about comparing it to other shows, and that wasn't really the point. The point was, I can think of a few shows. There's shows I like better, but do I think it's great? It's great dialogue. It's great intellectual. It has great intellectual prowess. On those levels, for me, it's great.
Right.
Now,
and it makes you think as well, because I was there sitting there watching the first episode, as I said, and I'm like, what's going on here? And I actually even remember while I was watching it, it was on for an hour and 6 minutes or something. But I was an hour and a half watching it because I felt myself going back, rewinding it back just to
right, because you wanted
because I thought I missed something. Like, and I love TV shows like that. If you can get a TV show that can make me use my brain and engage me, you've won me over straight away. And that, again, I don't want to harp into Doctor Who, but that's what Doctor Who used to do sometimes with us.
Right.
It would engage us and stories would suck us in, and we'd be really trying to figure out what's going on.
I like a show that I can watch it and then go back to it a day later, rewatch it, and get something out in a different way. Find something else to appreciate about it.
Back 20 years and still watch it and get enjoyment out.
Yeah, I can still laugh at some of those scenes.
And you do get that with this. I've watched The Single Detective now probably about this will be the 7th time since it was on, and almost every time, at whatever point in my life I go back to it, I get something new from it. I don't think I've seen it for about 7 years. A hell of a lot has happened to me in my personal life since I last saw this. And so I'm already getting something completely different out of it. Kind of as you were saying, Jason, about the guy at the end of his rope and all that. It's exactly perfectly phrased. And this is how I'm coming to it now, having been in similar situations. Thankfully, not in hospital, but been through similar situations and through various trials that life does throw your way. I'm sort of looking at it completely differently. And I think to compare it to most of the other shows. To compare anything that Dennis Potter ever did, to be fair, but to compare it to most of the other shows that we've mentioned tonight already is apples to oranges. It's that simple. This stuff is so unique.
But the question
I think in some ways it is pretentious. In some ways you could say it is pretentious.
We were talking about dialogue, and quite frankly, it is pretentious. The Singing Detective is pretentious, right? Full stop, right? Of course it is. Of course it is.
I think it's.
He was allowed to break those rules, right? Any other filmmaker at that moment in time wasn't allowed to. But because it was Dennis Potter, he was allowed to do all that. So everybody wanted Dennis Potter to work for them, right? So there you go.
The guy did. What's the name again? The Boys in the Black stuff.
I think it's an indulgence. Alan Ayckbourn.
Alan Ayckbourn. There were a few people who are of a high enough caliber at that time in British TV who could pretty much do whatever they wanted. He was
Russell T Davies is this now. Yeah, that's how he's able to get stuff like Cucumber made, which nobody likes. But he's able to experiment like that, and people will give him the platform to do that, and pretty much bankroll it and stand by it as well afterwards, whether it does well or not.
And a couple of things. Let me just say this: a couple of things. Noel, I would recommend you go to the synopsis on Wikipedia for this show, and that'll give you a whole new appreciation if you haven't done it already, or you're not sure what's going on. I'm saying, look,
go in blind. I'd rather go in blind.
Well, you go in blind. You can go in blind, but if I had stayed blind during the show, and I'm not saying Wikipedia is the best source for this, but if I had gone in completely blind, I don't know that I would have really gotten what I've gotten out of it, having an understanding of what I'm looking at. You can do that. I would recommend to someone who's actually kind of went in cold but came out warm. I would recommend going in warm. It's not gonna change. It's not gonna change.
I get what you're saying. But yeah. I have to say, when Rabbi says watch it, I was kind of like, no, this is going to be, because
the name doesn't inspire.
The name doesn't inspire. But from that very first thing, as I said, I was captivated. I actually really.
Yeah, the thing is that name. Look, first off, I'm not really into musicals. Okay, I mean, the last musical I saw, I could have just fallen asleep, and I'm not into detective genres. So this name, it combines two genres that are absolutely anathema to me. But
same here.
Yeah. So for me, I like I said, I would recommend though you go in a little bit warm. Don't go totally in cold. That's just my recommendation. But
if you have to investigate what the show is all about because you don't understand it, that means the show has failed to a certain degree.
Oh no!
Of course it has. Of course it has. If you do not understand what you're watching, then that means it's failed. No. I'm sorry, but that's just the way.
I just don't agree.
I wouldn't go as far to say it's failed. It's either a fault on my part because I haven't picked up or I
you couldn't understand it. Yeah, you couldn't understand it. Sure.
Look. The corollary, the thing I would compare this to that people didn't understand until it was explained to them was an album like Pink Floyd's The Wall. That looks like an insane piece of work until you actually comprehend what the basis for it was. It just looks like the Roger Waters with some nutball that put together, a string of a collection of scenes and elements that have no relation to reality. It's just about some guy who's lost it. That's not what it's about. And when you understand the backstory, it gives it so much depth. And I'm not saying it's the greatest album in the world, but it certainly comes alive. It's the same thing with an album like Dark Side of the Moon. When you understand what that was based on, brings that album to life. If you don't, you're going to just go into it like a 5-year-old, and you're going to come out like a 5-year-old.
Well, I think I kind of grasped what's going on in it anyway. Well, I thought is this in his head? Is this playing out in his head? Is this a story that's playing out in his head?
Yeah, you're right.
In hospital. Like, he's in hospital, right? I know that part, and they're all real patients, and then all the man walking down the as I said, the alleyway, that's all the dream sequence, isn't it? That's all in your man's head because you suffer from pain and hallucinations. Right. He thinks there's a cat in his bed nibbling at his toes, and then there's was that old man though, that scene with the old man?
That was real.
That was definitely real, wasn't it? But why was the nurse laughing? I didn't get that.
Because it was funny, because it was less like, and also
but hang on, the man has the skin that he basically can't move without being in agony, and there's an old man pounding on Michael Marlowe's character.
See, this is
he's there screaming, "Get your man off me!" and she's there like with the torch in her hand.
Right, yeah, that
well, you see, this is the reason why I didn't like 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? Because 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Hang on, I have to have a serious now.
Let me finish. Let me finish.
It's okay. Yeah, I agree. Let him finish. That's fine. Go ahead.
It's the reason why I didn't like 2001: Space Odyssey, because it was boring. Right, it was boring, and the only bit I liked is when Hal was trying to get rid of those guys off the ship. Right, everything else was slow, boring. Right, if you took bits out of it, it wouldn't have made any difference to the story. Right, and the difference between people are saying, "Oh, it's such a great movie and stuff." I'm sorry, but I disagree.
It is.
If you don't get it, if you go to the cinema and you watch this and you're bored, and you see scenes that drag on, right? And you get to the ending and you still are puzzled about what went on,
Yeah,
then I'm sorry, it failed. It failed.
Really? Well, a show like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas might come across as some gobbledygook to somebody who doesn't understand what the. Yeah, that was good. That was good. Unless you don't understand what the hell is going on in the show.
Man. You're a walking contradiction in. Right? You like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, right? You like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, right? And that is, I agree with you, it's a great movie, right? You'd enjoy it better if you were out of your head, to be quite honest. Right? Space Odyssey, right? I can't believe that you don't look at that. Was more than just the dialogue. That was about the visuals. It was everything that was on screen. It wasn't just about the dialogue. You might have found the board, which is fair enough, but I think that movie is a masterpiece, and I'd say most of them in the panel would probably agree. I think it was absolutely fantastic. That's what kind of
a lot of people. You see, this is the thing. I like my films too. I like to understand my movies, right?
You like it to be spelled out for you in clear and plain English.
Not particularly. I like to understand it, and I like it to be in a clever way. But I'm sorry, but I've always said this about 2001: Space Odyssey, that I never liked it ever. I thought the show was great. The special effects was good. I liked the howl scene, but everything else was just
look. I can respect your opinion, but I think this is the difference between, like, say, for example, classic writing. You look at the writers. There are layers of understanding when it comes to writing. Good classic writing, and you can get through the top layer a lot of times, but you don't really appreciate good classic writing until you dig in and dig in and dig in, and you start to absorb some of the deeper layers. Having everything just handed to you.
That's not what I'm saying.
Well, if you like that, that's great. Everything doesn't necessarily need to be handed to me. I personally went into Singing Detective with it handed to me because I didn't feel like sorting through. I could have figured it out, I'm sure, because I did this on the first episode. It wasn't like, I got to the sixth one and I had to go look up the Cliff's notes. No, it was just a case of I personally wanted to go into it with my eyes open. That's all. I didn't want to go through this blind for the first half. It gave me a better appreciation. In my case, some people, they don't want to cheat. They want to get to the end, and then they'll come up with their own meaning.
Modern TV generally, I mean, this has changed a little in the last few years with some of the streaming service programming that's come out. TV for a long time was starting to go down a road whereby the audience, it was doing all of the work for you. And I think that sometimes having to put the work in, not necessarily to understand, but to sort of to stitch it all together and to stick with it until the end and get that sense of satisfaction. When there was, I mean, in some senses, you could say it's from a bygone era, particularly in the UK where we only had 4 TV channels. There wasn't a huge amount of choice, and so you could be delivered this material. You could be you could call it lecturing. You could, you're being given this material. It's being delivered to you. And people. I mean, I suppose some people may have bailed on it, but I think a lot of the time, the reward that you would hope, you would keep faith that reward was coming later on, and stay with the show. And that's certainly, as I watched this, just as a boy, I remember getting more reward every single time I watched it. Now, I didn't understand it, and even now, I'm not the most critical of thinkers, as I keep telling people, but I get that sometimes with things now, and I keep the faith. Sometimes that faith is rewarded, and I'm rewarded with either a nourishment for my mind, or just being given a bloody good time that I wouldn't have missed for the world, just being entertained for over however long. And I think that's a bit of a gamble when you invest in a TV show. You don't necessarily know where those cards are going to fall, and that's okay. I think with something like The Singing Detective, you're only potentially wasting 6.5 hours of your life. When people do that, when people put together TV shows where sometimes you can waste 20 hours of your life, or say 4 or 5 years worth of seasons, like certain programs that J.J. Abrams has put together, then that's when I start to get pissed off.
And I think in the case of this show in particular, though, when you look at I just knew based on what I was looking at, this has a meaning. Obviously, there is a meaning to this. I'm not picking it up immediately, but this is a fault. This is a fault of my own. This isn't the fault of the show. This obviously has a meaning. That there's a very deep undercurrent of meaning here. It's a matter of can I tease it apart? Can I parse it? Is it within my capability early on? And I just felt like, you know what, I maybe I should have held out, but I didn't feel like doing that. I can do that. I think 2001.
Jason, I think the difference is this: when me and Dan watched it in England, we were bombarded with the culture telling us that this was something worthwhile, something worthwhile investing your time.
It was a cultural event. Yeah,
you're right. You never heard of it, and you're like, "Well, what is this?" But
to the show's credit, though, I knew watching this show. This show based on how it was laid out and the organization of the scenes, and there was a lot of thought. I knew they just weren't creating something that it's superficial in meaning, and this is. I knew, I can recognize that the quality of not just the writing, but the quality of
it's the structure of it.
Yeah, exactly. The organization of the scenes and how they structured those scenes, and the way they layered them. There's a lot going on in that, and that's not, there's a lot of thought that was put into this. So the fact that I don't absorb it right off and understand it right off isn't so much a fault of the show. This show is deep, and you can't always, blame the show because you don't get it right off. That's not, that's just, for me, that doesn't make sense. Now, if it was a simple show and it was just a case, you didn't get that because it's only one dimensional, well, then maybe that is the fault of the show,
The words that keep popping into my head it's televised literature. That's what it is.
It was.
I mean, even though I appreciated the Singing Detective, I have to literally use the words that it is very pretentious. This is just my opinion.
I disagree with that as well. But I do. You see, where I think of pretentious stuff, when I think of pretentious, of the whole the accusation of it being pretentious, I do know what you mean. I personally don't think it is, but I think on the other side of the line, you've got, and I don't know if any of you have seen this. I'm going to talk about the final episode, but I won't talk about it in great detail. What I think is a good thing to compare this to, which I do think is pretentious and has got some of these qualities, is the final episode of The Prisoner, Fallout. That's also got music. That's also got that sort of musical element to it. I personally do think that's really pretentious.
But it is. The Prisoner's very pretentious.
Let me ask you, Ian. When you say pretentious, can you give me? Because there are several senses of that. In what sense do you feel it's pretentious, particularly?
Which one?
Well, you tell me. You're using the word pretentious. In what way do you feel it's pretentious?
I just looked at the definition and it didn't fit that at all.
I never washed my hands.
Well, it's trying to be too clever for its own good in certain things, as I explained about the different tones of directing and stuff like that. Plus the fact that it sometimes is a chore to watch as well.
Why do you,
I have to ask you. What was it trying to be too clever? I can't imagine this being any more clever than it is.
And also,
it's
why?
Very, very clever.
Also, I guess my question is, and why do you feel it was a chore to watch? In addition to Rabbi's question, what was it that made it a chore for you?
It's just how it moved slow. That's all. But that's just me. That's just me.
And your question, Rabbi, was what?
What's the question, Rabbi?
You had a good question, Rabbi.
Let's jump on. We'll get who we lost. It's
no.
We lost Noel. But just to make it clear, right? How this started was that you said you were comparing dialogue, and I was saying that I thought the dialogue from House MD and the dialogue in it's just as good. That's what I was trying to clarify.
Right.
But I do think shows like this is quite pretentious because of the scope and because of what it tries to do, add loads of different things in there. And sometimes you get a bit confused, and it's quite slow as well. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, right.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, but is that not what we want from TV shows? We want TV shows to be able to fool us.
No. There are different TV shows. There's a TV show that's fun, that you just watch it and you laugh all the way through it, and
Yeah,
you don't have to work it out. Then there were shows like Mr. Robot, and then there were shows like Dexter, and then there were shows like there were all kinds of shows.
Do you feel that this show was supposed to be fun and light and was supposed to be on that level, or what was your expectation going in? Because I think that may be what we're dealing with here. What was the expectation?
I knew exactly what I was going to be watching.
So you're comparing
it.
I guess what I'm asking is, you're comparing it to a show like House, which I think is
I'm not. The question was the dialogue between House, and I answered that, and I said I think House's dialogue is just as good.
In what sense? In what sense?
How could I compare them both?
Well, that's exactly what we're doing, is we're comparing them both. We just did. I'm asking, what sense do you think it was on par?
Well, it's very straight in what you call it, Singing Detective. It's very very British, and the House's dialogue is far more than that. There's depth to it, but also there's humor. That's the thing about House.
Okay.
But that's the thing. The thing is, though, because you can't, it's just a difference of opinion.
Yeah,
I've got nothing against
I get that. I guess my impression,
what you think at all.
No, I know. I guess my impression of House, being an American, I see this a lot, and to me, they're a dime a dozen. It's the old, let's be witty and snarky, and we're the witty, snarky doctor that knows everything. It's basically an older version of Doogie Howser.
It's not. It's
well, except Doogie Howser was just a young guy who got pushed around. Whereas
that's the thing. This is where me and you are different, because if you actually watch House, you will understand what I'm saying.
Well, I do watch House. I have watched House.
But that's what I'm saying.
Honestly, I think House I'll put in the same category as this show. I think it lasted for
dialogue. I'm not talking about
about the dialogue. It's a contemporary show. Was it Lie to Me? Did you ever see that show?
Yeah, that was.
I love Lie to Me.
I love that show.
I think they're both on a kind of a similar level, which again, it's just this was an expression of this was a piece of art. This was I don't pretending. This was genuinely
film noir as well. They had a bit of that going through. There was different genres in this show, this fourth episode. I can see what Ian is saying, but I will, like everybody on the panel, and I'm sorry for this, Ian, but I do have to disagree with you. I think there is room. I think there is room for shows like this. I mean, if all shows were all like the way you've described them, the way you'd want them, then we'd probably get bored of TV.
No, I think Ian's got good intent. I don't think he's trying to be disagreeable.
No, I know he's not.
I mean, look, I respect his opinion. I guess for me, if I had both scripts in hand, if I had a really good script from House, and there was no, let's just talk dialogue. There was no actors, nothing. And I looked at the script for The Senior Detective. In the portions of the script, the portions of the scenes that I like, let's say between one character who is, he's a very well-respected character, and then you have Michael Gambon's character, and they're sort of doing this power struggle. Yeah. That scene, that initial scene, and it may be in episode 2, that initial scene, if I saw that on paper and compared it to any episode that I've seen of House, would blow House out of the water on a dialogue level. Now, I'm not saying all of The Senior Detective was...
Every scene with, what's his name? What's the name of that actor?
Michael Gambon.
What?
Michael Gambon?
No, the one.
The other guy I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That was in Minder.
No. Yeah, I'm looking up. Great actor.
We're talking about Singing Detective here, are we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which actor?
Malahide stuff.
Who? What? Everybody's confused.
Yeah. Ian, can I ask you why Rabbi's checking out?
Fantastic.
Sorry, Noel?
I was going to say, while Rabbi is checking out whatever he's checking out, I was going to ask you, do you like the movie The Shining?
Yes, I did.
I haven't seen it.
Well,
I've not long got it. No, I saw it when I was a little kid. That doesn't count. It's been a long time. I do mean I'm watching that very, very soon because I want to watch the sequel too. So don't say anything about it, or I'll have to turn my mic and camera off.
Why did you ask her, Noel?
No, because I was going to ask you, what did you think of the dialogue and that? Because I would say that's pretty close to what we got in the Singing Detective.
Yeah, it's very sparse, and we all know that Jack Nicholson made up some lines during shooting, but it's very A to B, that dialogue in The Shining. So.
Shining is Stanley Kubrick. Like every frame of that is intentional. There's no frame of that movie. There's no portion of the frame of that movie that isn't like intently planned and like sweated over by Kubrick. He was crazy.
He was a nightmare to work with, apparently.
The character that I'm thinking of is played by Bill Patterson.
Oh, am I losing again?
Bill Patterson. He plays Dr. Well, I shouldn't even mention that, but Bill Patterson. Don't look it up, Noel. I'm just telling you. Just telling
Rabbi's frozen. Rabbi's frozen.
Yeah, his internet, he's having problems.
Here we go again. He's having these technical issues, which stinks.
You mentioned who mentioned?
I do not have the thing. I'm just coughing.
What's that, Dan?
I was coughing. I don't have the thing. I'm just coughing.
That's all right. That's all right, mate.
That's all right. We've talked a little bit about 2001: A Space Odyssey tonight.
Yeah.
And obviously, the great director Stanley Kubrick. And I wanted to talk about the director of this, John Emile. There's a scene, and we got a little snippet of it going to the end of episode 1. And when I look back on The Singing Detective, obviously I think of the fact that he has to have his penis greased and all that sort of thing, and the singing and the dancing. But there's one scene that always stays in my memory in between viewings, and we got it right at the end of this episode.
Yeah,
and it's when the young Philip is sat in the tree, high, so high in the tree, and it's swaying in the breeze. It's swaying in the breeze like that. And well, this is how we ended the episode 1, isn't it? And it's there swaying in the breeze like that, and he looks dead at the camera. Now, to me, that is almost Kubrick. It's a beautiful moment.
Right. And how they did that with a drone is beyond me.
It would have been a crane shot.
That was a shot, wasn't it?
And the way it goes down and then back, I just thought it was absolutely beautiful, and it never disappoints me. And the director, he went on to direct several big films after this. I know that Sean Connery's film Entrapment with Catherine Zeta-Jones, the Richard Gere movie Summersby, and there was a serial killer thing, I think, with Sigourney Weaver, something like that. But he went on to have a major career after this. Copycat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just looking. He directed, I think, one of my favorite streaming shows from last year, Carnival Row.
I was going to ask that. I didn't know what he was doing now, so I did wonder what. But for me, the direction, the fact that it's all shot on film, obviously makes it just look beautiful. And I'm surprised some of it wasn't in black and white, come to think of it. But so that helps. Obviously, I'd love to see this in HD. But having a director of this, he hadn't actually done a huge amount at the time, but he obviously went on to great things. I don't know how old he is. He must be younger than I realised. Then I assumed, at first I thought it was somebody like Rennie Roy, because it's got that same kind of feel to it. But it's just fantastic. And the other person I wanted to mention was the producer of this. And I looked through the credits, you see. I don't know if anybody noticed this, who the producer was.
Who was it?
It's a guy called Rick McCallum.
Oh, the guy who did Star Wars.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, if you want to talk about populist entertainment, Rick McCallum.
Yeah.
And I always forget this in between viewings of The Singing Detective. Rick McCallum he'd been working with Potter since Pennies from Heaven. In fact, I think he worked on something else with him either before or just after. So he was with the BBC for the most part, and off the back of The Singing Detective, which I think may have got Emmys or Emmy nominations, it was a huge international success, The Singing Detective. Right. And off the back of this, Rick McCallum, Rick McCallum attracted the attention of Lucasfilm and went to work on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. That was pretty much his show. He put that all together. And in fact, I think John Emile might have ended up directing some of that.
I'd just like to say, though, this is nothing new for me about 2001 Space Odyssey and The Big Blue and all these films that I consider pretentious. When I was at college and I couldn't afford to go to film school, but I did go to a course where there was film theory and photography and graphics. And I used to have arguments with the students around me when I used to say that. I used to say, I don't like 2000 Space Odyssey. And I used to get slaughtered. Everybody used to have a go at me and stuff like that. I'm used to it.
I'm lukewarm on it myself. I'm not a huge fan.
Well, the trick with these movies is this. Acid, okay? Drop a tab of acid. Go and watch 2001. It's awesome.
Let me interject. Ian, look, I agree with Ian to this extent. I do regarding 2001. It is a masterpiece in many respects, but I agree that there are scenes in that show that they I think it was because at the time he had created really from a special effects standpoint at that time it was a masterpiece.
It was,
and I think there was a lot of I want to say this is my opinion, but there was a lot of focus on long stretches of ships docking and but really to play up how great the special effects were. And I know there was more to it than that. It's to draw you in. You know, he had his own thing when it came to direction. But I do agree though, the most cringeworthy scene, and I don't care what anyone says for me in 2001, the most cringeworthy scene would have to be the opening with those with the guys in the gorilla suits or whatever, you know, the prehistoric those are very, for me, that's a very hard watch. I just, you know, they could have cut all that out and I would have been fine. I don't care. Yeah. I don't care if it's necessary for the story. I don't care. They could have cut it out and it wouldn't have affected my appreciation for the show whatsoever. But I think once the show gets into the meat of it and you get past these long stretches and you could have cut out a lot of that. I think there is something there, and understanding it, having a greater understanding of what's going on for me. Yeah. I think the understanding of what the show is about did offset a lot of those long stretches and drawn out this and drawn out that. Some of that is boring.
But you know what, right? I wrote a review on Facebook because I have this thing called the Mega Geek. I have a page called the Mega Geek, and I did a review of an old film. And guess what it was? It was 2010. And I literally said in my review, I thought 2010 was far more competent film than 2001. And I literally got slaughtered by all my friends.
Look, here's the thing. Here's the thing. Noel and I both agree that 2010 is a really great show. I think it's a great show. I think in some ways it's more accessible than 2001. I would agree on that point. But I do think 2001 has something that it's the elements that 2001, I want to say the production, the direction, there's something about it that is that really will stand the test of time.
Yeah, of course.
Compared to 2010, which was more of I got the sense that it was, there were elements for that remind you of what. Yes, I can't say that's true for 2001 as well, but 2001 retains this timeless quality, whereas 2010, there's something about it, I think, that you can definitely pinpoint what
I don't know
that incorporated more elements of the period that it was directed and created in. Maybe, I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly, but there's something about it that was less for me.
I personally think it's a very underrated movie.
I think it's great. Yeah, I agree.
And I honestly think that it's far more enjoyable than 2001. But that's not saying 2001. 2001 is a masterpiece, right? You've got to admit, it's a masterpiece.
We had gotten off into me agreeing with Ian about certain portions of 2001 being a bit boring, and then he had mentioned that he thought 2010. He wrote up a column. It was a review on his page.
2010 is definitely a much more accessible movie.
Yeah, that's what I said. It's a much more accessible show, and I said my point was I think 2001 is just a more timeless movie because of its production qualities and the way that it was filmed. Yeah, I think it just has a more timeless quality.
Forward.
Yeah,
so 2010 was a good movie. I mean, I think we probably exhausted everything there is.
Well, it's back.
Have we?
Oh no, Dan's got something to say.
Shall we go around?
Can I add one more thing, Rabbi? One more thing I do want to add is
go around and bring up anything we want to talk about.
Oh, okay.
Or do you have anything? Add your favorite movie.
Go on, Jason.
Oh, okay. The only other thing I was going to add is that I didn't mention, and I would be curious what you guys thought for this particular episode, because I could say the whole, this pertains to the whole 6 episodes. But for this episode, I personally really preferred the present layer of, there's all these layers. I personally preferred the layer in the present. Right. But, I don't know how you guys feel about it. But I thought that was a curious observation, because we hadn't really discussed which layer of the show that we tend to prefer. That was just
that's a good question. Which layer do we prefer? Okay, let's go around.
I like all of them, to tell you the truth.
I like them all, but I like the present the best.
Oh, right. Okay.
Any preferences? Anyone?
I've
No.
well.
What? Do you have a favorite moment? Do you have anything you want to talk about?
My favorite moment was. Sorry, Noel. Go ahead, mate. Sorry. Noel.
No problem. Yeah, my favourite moments were actually just in the hospital. I did like the whole. I was very interested in finding out what the dude was doing with the two women. You know.
You find out next week. Don't worry, that happens.
All right. Well, then that's good. Yeah. I liked it all. There wasn't that I didn't dislike about it. To be honest with you, as I said, it was engaging. So I can't wait to see what happens next week.
Okay, I'm uploading it right now for you.
My favourite bit is when what's his name had a heart attack and the lollies falls to the ground and
yes,
that was my favourite bit.
I forgot. I always forget that he passes away.
Yeah, sad.
Yeah,
because he's such a memorable character. You get the whole thing.
Yeah,
when he grieves for him, when he takes the sweet.
Yeah,
right.
He does, yeah.
He takes the sweet off the floor, off the nurse. And you can see, he immediately feels all that solace. It's just beautiful. I mean, I think both of the actors played it all. It's just amazing. The lightness of touch between them. I just thought it was wonderful, wonderful stuff.
Mm. Well, it was a good show.
And how confident are they of their characters as Potter and of his writing to have a character like that and to kill him off right away? I mean, everybody in that ward. You're talking about the old man and Reginald. All of those actors. Well, actually, the old man died only a few years ago. David Ryle, I think his name is. And he always played the same character. But those actors, they kept on working. Reginald, the young guy with the newspaper, you see him turn up in things all the time.
Thing over and over again.
Yeah.
All of these
BBC, they did have their actors, didn't they? That they kept, churning out, on different shows at that moment in time.
Do you want, if we're going to wind down then, how about we take it back to a happy place? How about we take it back to familiar shores for a few minutes?
We were in a happy place.
We take it back. Because I want to talk about Doctor Who.
Oh, no. Okay. Really?
Now, I'm going to talk about Doctor Who because last week I watched Revelation of the Daleks.
Right.
I'm doing a Colin Baker watch. And, of course, I come to this from 1986, so the year afterwards. And who do I see in this? Trevor Cooper from Revelation of the Daleks. So there's him for a start. You've got the two detectives, the two Spiff type characters, the spies that are following Patrick Malahide around in the 19.
Right.
40s.
One of them is what's his name? Biggs. From Star Wars.
You're talking about Dennis. What's his name? Not Dennis Weaver. You're Dennis. Hugh McGregor's uncle.
Yeah.
The one they had in like one blink and you miss it thing in The Rise of Skywalker.
I'm talking about the littler one is the actor Ron Cook, who was Parker in the Thunderbirds movie that Jonathan Frakes made with Sophia Myles, and he was also in the Idiot's Lantern, the Doctor Who story from 2006.
I'm going to ask you a question about that episode, right? When I first saw that episode, I thought the special effects in the beginning was really good when the TARDIS was turning and it goes into the thing when they capture the TARDIS in the very beginning of the episode.
They put real money into that. Josh. The same money into it. It was the same people who did. There was a show called The Tripods at the same time, and they did a similar tracking shot with them, and that's how they got the job.
Wow.
You're also seeing this. The old man, the old man who was in the beds with them. That was an actor called Leslie French. Leslie French died, I think, about 15, maybe 20 years ago. But he was on the shortlist to play the first Doctor.
Oh wow!
Before William Hartnell, he was he was the hot favourite because he was a little bit, obviously, he was younger than William Hartnell, a bit more physically capable, and a bit more available. So, obviously, he didn't get the part, but he did turn up in Doctor Who eventually in 1980. In 1988, he turned up in Doctor Who eventually in a little part. But my favourite Doctor Who pick from this to finish off with Doctor Who is, and you only see her in a few scenes in this, Rabbi. I don't know if you noticed.
What?
the night nurse in this, the big black woman who comes in with, laughing with them at the end when the old man tries to dry hump him.
Right.
The night nurse is played by Sharon D. Clarke, who plays Grace in Doctor Who now. Bradley Walsh's wife, who died in The Girl Who...
Is that her?
Wow,
that's Sharon D. Clarke, when she was about...
What a shame she didn't make it into real Doctor Who.
20. So we do see a lot more of her. Obviously, she was a big West End musical star, so I suppose we're going to get to see her sing and dance as things go on. But yeah, that's Sharon D. Clarke, and she's about 22. So
right. I love that.
She doesn't look like she's aged at all.
No, she's... I'm not going to say it, black don't crack. That's what they say. There she is. I've forgotten again. I forget these people are in it until I read the credits. Who? There she is.
Well, now it's very hard to watch. Oftentimes I watch and IMDb it as I'm watching it, but I found it too engrossing to do that.
Yeah, no, I never do that because at the time. Well, I've always been the type who reads the credits anyway. I've never needed IMDb. I'm too much of an anorak.
The best thing about Amazon when you're watching a show on Amazon, if you scroll your cursor over it, it shows you. It tells you the IMDb page, doesn't it? Cool. And it gives you information. In fact, I was watching Elementary a couple of days ago, and literally at the side it was telling you a mistake they made in that scene with the coffee cups. I was like, "Wow, this is really good." They should have that on. They should have that on Netflix as well. That'd be quite cool if they had on Netflix.
Netflix was trying to experiment with more like interactivity. But I don't think that Black Mirror did so great. But who knows? I have no idea. Okay, so I have to be up in like 4.5 hours right on the stream. I want to say like my favorite bit would be. Very specifically, when he's being greased and he's trying not to go in the direction and trying not to come.
All right.
The amount of time they take to clap was very realistic. It was like you could see him going to the point of no return and trying desperately not to. And I thought, that's very accurate. I've never seen that in a film, in a TV show before or since. And I endorse that. That's very good.
That makeup was really good, though. You got to admit, the makeup for the 80s, really good.
He looked like he was a burn victim to me initially before I knew.
Right. And I think my favorite story strand would be the detective story, the noir, because I'm just a sucker for that sort of stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, it's been fantastic to talk about this, Rabbi. Thank you for inviting me. And
it's a lot of fun. I think
I've really enjoyed it.
We'll watch a few more episodes and we'll go again.
Yay!
We'll do like more episodes next time. Like do episodes 2 and 3.
Yeah.
You might as well finish the whole. Once you start going down that road, you might as well finish them all off.
I'm uploading episodes 2 to 6 right now.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, if you're gonna, but just us doing a review.
You see all of it, Jason? You seen all of it?
Yeah, I watched them all within 2 or 3 days. Yeah.
Okay. Don't expect me to watch more than one a week. I've got too much to watch.
Yes, I am too. Well, get it.
But we can sort something out. So I'll say good night then. I'm Dan Hadley from the Spacebook and Type 40, my Doctor Who podcast. Could probably get sick of me going on about it, but you can catch it everywhere you get your podcasts, and I've dropped a link in the chat as well to the latest one about 1986. Thanks for having me, Rabbi. Good to see you all. I'll catch you all again soon, no doubt.
All right, nice to be with you, Dan.
I just want to let everybody know that everybody's links to their channels is. I got to change your channel. Everybody's link to everybody's channel is in the video description. So if you're watching this later, then you can click there. Fine. Mega Geek, do you want to say good night?
Yeah, I like to say good night, and it's been great sparring with both of you, Noel and Jason. I love sparring with you guys.
Good day.
Jason, do you have any closing thoughts?
Oh, what was that?
Closing thoughts.
Live long and prosper. God help us. God help us.
Peace out, brother.
Yep. Yeah. Take care, all.
No, do you have anything you want to say?
No. I'm only messing. Just subscribe to the new channel, The Irish Geek, if you haven't already. I'll be there
I have.
Until Sunday, I think, and then I'll be out of jail. So yeah. So we'll be on there. We'll be doing a few watch-alongs actually with Rabbi. We're going to be doing a few movies and stuff. So join
I saw
me.
when you guys got cut off.
Yeah, that was not so smart. What can you do?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. I'm gonna end the stream. Thank you everybody for coming along. Thank you for everybody in the chat, and we'll see you on the next one.
Cheers.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you later, Rabbi. Have a good one, right? You get some sleep, man.
Yeah, that's what I'm off right now.
Good night. See you, pal.